I'm a journalist with Spiegel Online, and we write about internet stuff all the time. Our office in Hamburg is located next to the Church of Scientology, and a few years back we noticed people with funny masks standing right in front of the Church of Scientology, and from there we started. We were chatting with people on IRC about Anonymous. We even met some people, anonymous activists in real life. Yeah. So, I'm going to my right and your left, which is Carolin Wiedemann, and she's a scientist. And what's your relationship with Anonymous?
Okay, thank you, Ole. My relationship to Anonymous, I always felt very attracted by the idea of overcoming certain forms of politics that are based on identity, identity politics that create hierarchies, and was interested in if the internet could provide new forms of communication to realize that. And that's the sort of new collectivity that Anonymous claims to be, and I try to analyze the way of the constitution of Anonymous, how it is constituted, and at the same time the inner contradictions of being at once an idea that has no leaders, no spokespersons, etc., and being a movement that tries to make a change. That's it.
All right, and to my left and your right is Frank Rieger from the Chaos Computer Club in Berlin.
Most people probably know me. I'm Frank Rieger. I'm one of the speakers of the Chaos Computer Club, which is the oldest and biggest known hacker organization on the planet. And my relationship with Anonymous is basically mostly when journalists call me and ask me, can you comment on that, or can you patch us through to somebody from Anonymous? We want to talk to somebody from Anonymous. And of course, having been involved in the in hacktivism and the debate and what we do on the internet for political reasons and what we don't for a long time, I'm of course also very much interested in what Anonymous is doing and what the tactics that they are developing and where they're intersect with what we're doing, and so yeah, it has been an interesting time with them.
Yeah, and last but not least, we have Jacob Appelbaum, who I believe crossed continents to be here today.
Yep, thanks for having me. It's really an honor to speak here and to be on the panel with you guys. My relationship to Anonymous is, I think, probably closer to everyone in the audience, which is to say that we are all anonymous. I work on anonymity software so that every person has the right to speak freely and to be able to read without exception. And I believe that vanguardist movements don't really work as well as populist movements where democratic change is possible and meritocracy is valued. And so I sort of came to be the punching bag about Anonymous in a sense, because a lot of the hacker community does not have solidarity with Anonymous, which I think is hilarious, because to the outside, the CCC, Anonymous, whatever other movements may exist in different places, there's no difference to an outsider. To an outsider, they're all hackers of some stripe, and I think we either all stand together or we all hang apart.
Woo! All right, yeah. I prepared some questions, and when I run out of questions, you gotta help me, and we open up, and you can ask your questions to these fabulous people here. My first question would be, the main modus operandi of Anonymous is like blocking websites, DDoSing websites, and my question would be, what is it good for? Or is it even dangerous if we from, I don't know, Berlin, Madrid, I don't know where, attempt to block the website of a government in maybe one of the Arab countries? Is it maybe even dangerous for the people on the ground? So what's blocking websites good for? I don't know. Jacob, maybe you?
I once heard a phrase here in Germany, I think it was atomic Kraft 9 Danke. And it was told to me by someone that blockaded an atomic waste transport of some kind. And I thought to myself that that was a really interesting strategy that caused a lot of personal risk, and maybe it had an economic impact on the ability to transport atomic waste. And it says something about the environment in which it is possible to have atomic waste, and for it to be transported, and for democracy to somehow potentially intervene with this thing which we have to deal with in some way. And I see that denial of service attacks are part of a sort of tool bag of different and varied tactics. And I think it's important to have respect for different tactics because we have a sort of similar strategy across most of the hacking world. And denial of service is one of the lamest possible tactics that exists. But it does raise awareness, and raising consciousness and awareness is extremely important. And so it can have an economic impact as well. For example, if you do a denial of service attack on a payment processing system, in theory, the only thing that you're actually stopping is the economic transactions. You're not actually stopping every form of speech or overloading all communication lines, but you are disrupting economically. And this is what the Critical Art Ensemble did in the 90s, and this is also what many protest movements have done throughout basically the entire 20th century, because it was the case that flows of power were essentially controlled by analog buildings and being able to enter those buildings to perform certain functions. So sitting and blocking was extremely disruptive economically, politically, and so on. Now that we've moved online, the electronic version of that sometimes is a useful tactic, but often it causes quite a lot of strife, especially in the hacker community. Right. But it has value, and we must respect, I think, the diversity of tactics.
I'd like to forward this question to Frank.
Yes.
Is it okay to block websites?
No.
Why is that?
It's quite simple. As hackers, we actually work for communications. So free communications is the ideal that we strive to achieve. And if you're looking at groups, for instance, like telecomics, who are among the most constructive and most helpful groups in the hacker community, for instance, uprisings in the Arab world, and they have an universal consensus, as the CCC as well has, that denial of service is not a tactic that achieves good things. Actually, this is basically our main point of dissent with Anonymous, is that basically using denial of service interrupts communication, and it is a tool that's indiscriminate. It is not true that it's just overloading the website that you're targeting. Most of the time, also the whole ISP is going down from the traffic. And so and you don't know what else is on the server. The same thing that applies to indiscriminate confiscation of computers is also applying to servers that have virtual hosts on them for targets of Anonymous. So, and there's of course something to be said for integrating more people into political action, like Anonymous tried to do with that. But on as many occasions in other things, putting the analogy to the real world with blocking a street is completely wrong. Because what you're doing there is you are out there and you are a face that is blocking there. So the whole difference there is that if you're blocking a website, it's totally anonymous and it's perceived as risk-free even if it isn't. And that means that there are quite a number of people that are getting now into jail, not expecting that, because they were expecting to be hiding anonymously behind their web browsers, and are basically made martyrs for no effect at all. And so while we see a wide variety of tactics that are respectable and okay to use in forms of civil disturbance or resistance, interrupting and disrupting communications, especially with unwitting people who are not really understanding the consequences of their actions, is something that we don't condone.
Yeah, but is there more to Anonymous than just DDoSing, blocking websites? Are there other forms of online protests, tactics, tools?
Yes, for sure, but I want to follow up what Frank just said, and I think I just met Mercedes Hefer in the US, one of the people who are accused by the FBI of having planned the Operation Payback and who were involved in the DDoS attack that is called Operation Payback, and I think I can agree with what Frank Rieger said. For example, she just had no idea that she could be identified through the FBI afterwards, and but I'm not sure. I'm in between both of you, in between your opinions, because me too. I think it's like a virtual sit-in and it's raising awareness and so on. But then it's just dangerous if people aren't aware that they can be identified. So yeah, just to finish that. And if you ask if Anonymous is more than yeah, DDoSing or hacking, for sure, and I think that's what is yeah, what's the whole idea is based on, is this experience of the common. And that's what a lot of texts are about. A lot of videos tell you that if you communicate anonymously online, you will realize, people will realize that all are equal, all have like equal needs, and that we can overcome these hierarchies that are based on you are a man, I'm a woman, black, white, and so on. Anonymous, the idea pretends that anonymity just provides equal voices, and yeah, I feel very attracted by this idea, and at the same time, it's just it forgets a lot of hierarchies that are still there, even if you communicate anonymously. There are, first of all, the internet isn't like a free and unstructured place. It's there are people who create it and or who create the sites where anonymous then, where people communicate anonymously. There are moderators and so on. There are these hierarchies. There are digital divides that, first of all, don't allow everybody to get online, and then even if people are anonymous, all of us are situated in our real lives and still are what we are made in real life, like women, men, and so on. And I think there are some neoliberal implications within the basic idea of anonymous that are quite problematic.
So while Jacob is calling for solidarity, Frank, what other forms of protests are there? So there are young people, they want to do something, they want to do it maybe in anonymity, maybe online, and you're saying DDoSing is not the way. What other ways are there?
Oh, there are plenty of ways, and Anonymous is, of course, using them as well. So there have been hacks where stuff has been published about misdeeds of companies and government agencies. There are communication campaigns that are being used to influence, for instance, not only online votes, but also Twitter and whatever there is in social media. So there is, of course, a lot of stuff that you don't see and don't hear. Especially when it comes to fighting oppressive regimes like in Syria, where people that are considering themselves anonymous are truly anonymous because they're not talking about what they're doing, only to the people where it matters. So there's a lot of stuff that is not going on in public, but very privately and very efficiently, where, for instance, communications are intercepted of the Syrian regime, like the emails unpublished, where work is being done to get communications into these countries, and so basically basically activism is not limited to just denial of service, and these are, of course, forms of activism that we find highly attractive and that we support fully as the hacker community here in Europe as well. Because we're using them as well, and we are basically not saying, okay, Anonymous is bad because they're using denial of service attacks. We're just saying, okay, this is a stupid thing and you shouldn't do it.
All right, but an hacking attack like on HB Gary, which was a US company involved in, I don't know, surveillance, spying techniques, and Anonymous brought them down by publishing huge amounts of emails, but it was a perfect legal business. And then Anonymous stepped in and destroyed this perfectly legal business. Is that a form of activism that you can stand behind?
Yes.
Sure.
All right.
Can I play the bad guy here for a second? Can I play the bad guy?
We can both play the bad guys, of course.
So HB Gary, for those of you that don't know, was involved with a company called Palantir, and they made a graph of sort of like who to target in the WikiLeaks organization, and they put me and Glenn Greenwald and a number of other people up there and basically said that we were fair game. And when they were caught, and fair game, by the way, is I use that in the Scientology sense, and like they can go after us, fair game. So they considered us private citizens exercising our basic human rights, the right to speak, the right to read. They thought that we were fair game. Just because they're a business, ironically, I had nothing to do with this, I claim, Your Honor, that I think, you know, for me to care about them, I feel like there's some aspect where they should care also about the rest of us and what they do. Their business model, in some sense, is oppressive. And I don't really have a lot of sympathy for them, even though I don't know that I would agree with exactly the outcome that has occurred. But in this case, in the end, the CEO of that company actually called a bunch of people on that graph, but they never called me, ever. So they apparently still think that I'm fair game. And I think that what Anonymous did in hacking them was really fantastic, because it showed the true nature of these people. And it even showed later that when they were exposed, that their true nature is that they're motherfuckers. And they profit off of the misery of other people and targeting them and harming them. And breaking into their computers may not be legal, but it was certainly ethical, because it exposes that they are, in fact, almost exactly the same as the criminals they suggest that they will protect us from. And that is important. That's huge.
Yeah, what actually came out essentially in the course of these hacks and publications is that the HP Gary Federal was not a perfectly legitimate business. So it was only legitimized because they had federal contracts to do illegal things and stuff that are illegal in many countries in the world. Which is like breaking into computers, invading private people's life and threatening them with destructing their lives. And if the government doesn't step in to end the business of these companies, it's perfectly legitimate to do that the way Anonymous did.
And I guess while we can go behind that and say, yes, well, that's the right course, because anybody can call themselves anonymous, we see nowadays maybe actions which are not so much in the black or in the white area, but are maybe in the gray area. And I don't know, maybe we can hear about a little bit more about these gray and dark and white areas, and who calls himself anonymous and for what cause?
Yes, and there's already, that already leads to another very important question, and that is one that is connected to the HP Gary attack or all these operations. That's the question of how does Anonymous decide whether to create an attack or whether to do an operation, and
who's bad? Who's the bad guy? Who decides that?
And who's the bad guy? Yes, who can be attacked or who's that's all about, in the end, it's about having an identity and trying to get, to create an identity for Anonymous that legitimates then all these attacks and so on. So there must be not only this swarm-like pattern, but also a purpose that all these decisions are based on. But then there's still, and that's freedom of communication and information for everybody, and that's linked to the idea that everybody can be anonymous, but only if everybody has access and can communicate anonymously. But then there is still the big question of who is part of it and who takes the decision in the end. And if, for example, Mercedes Hefer, she decides, I want to attack HP Gary, and she asks people in the chat who will join me. She told me that for her, that's the biggest difference between the Occupy movement that she's very involved in Las Vegas. She's one of the people who inspired the Occupy movement in Las Vegas. That's what she says. And she's involved in Occupy and in Anonymous. And for her, the biggest difference is that if you want to decide anything with Occupy, if you want to create a common demand, you have to discuss it for days and days. It's very democratic, and everybody has to give his or her voice, very equally. And she told me, if you want to do an attack or a DDoS or anything with Anonymous, you just mention it in the chat, and then perhaps within a few minutes there are enough people together to do it. But what is this enough? Is it democratic, or on which politics is it based on in the end? That's the accountability problem as well.
And what ethics is it based on? This is basically the core question. So is there a common ethics to that? And that is also one of the main points of worry for me about Anonymous, is that it hasn't basically crystallized. So there is no, it has been going on for a number of years now, and there are, at least in my opinion, from what I see and what I read in the journals and in the published documents, the ethics has not really crystallized, which it should have by now. And the point now is there that the government has stepped up, so that the party is basically over because the government is investing, especially US government is investing substantial resources, which also means infiltration, which also means putting people in there that do provocation attacks. The FBI has whole divisions that are just meant for provocation attacks, basically discrediting social movements by letting them do or inspiring them to do really stupid illegal stuff, the same that they do with terrorists or Islamists. And so this is the point why I think that if there is no transformation in the Anonymous movement in the sense that there is a common ethics crystallizing and people saying, okay, we adhere to that, or we are maybe form a tribe in Anonymous that is adhering to these kind of ethics, if that doesn't manifest, then the movement will relatively soon be over.
Let me add to that. In the past year or past years, we have seen some huge successfully operations like against the Church of Scientology, Operation Payback, in support of WikiLeaks. And then everywhere on the planet, anonymous groups popped out and started doing small things which we didn't even get noticed in Europe because it was something with drug lords in South America. And then there was Turkish and Kurd rebels doing stuff against their government. Then there was the Spanish youth unemployment and so on and so on. Then we had Occupy, again, Guy Fawkes masks in the media, which was, I don't know, the third wave of Anonymous maybe. And my question would be, have we reached peak Anonymous? Is the party really over, like Frank said?
I mean, I really respect Frank a lot. Frank is one of the most inspiring people that I've ever met in my whole life, and he advises me about all kinds of stuff all the time. But on this point, I think we disagree, because it's like, as my friend Dimitri Kleiner often says, it's an old rock and roll guy talking to the new young punk rocker saying, listen, we went far, but that shit about cutting your wrists, that's just too much. And I respect that there's a difference.
Okay, so then here's the point. What is actually happening?
Okay, first of all, when we say what is anonymous, we have to stop thinking about it in terms of a group that has some people, that has a set of unifying points, and it is only possible to form a free association of multiple people in that way. First point, that's not the case. Second point, it's a label that people apply to themselves because they may not have the same positions of privilege of people that can be in such a group. So for example, if you work at a military contractor, I'm sure someone here does. In my country, it's definitely the case that if there were this many people in a room, one of them would be there, maybe 100. And that label allows people not necessarily to endorse all the other collective actions that have occurred under that label, but it allows that person to take action and hopefully to escape, from some sense, retribution. So for example, leaking a document that is extremely important, maybe even faking it so that it looks like it's a hack, when in fact it's a leak. And then we talk about the ethics of hacking when really it's an insider leaking a document, right? That label is very valuable, and it's the opposite of a vanguardist movement. It's actually, I think, extremely democratic because all people, without exception, can participate. It does not necessarily mean that it results in justice. That's separate, though. And I think it's different in Europe, but at least in the American hacker culture, it's split along financial lines. Like the DARPA hackers obviously don't like Anonymous very much. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Program that is part of the Department of Defense, right? So they build robots to kill people. They don't, and guns to kill people. They don't care very much, I think, about what Anonymous is doing. And there are other people that care very much about it because they see that it inherently is a democratic thing, and it's based on merit, and sometimes bad things happen, but you have to individually analyze each action that takes place and then decide, is that reasonable or not? And it's just like any other group in this regard, except anybody can do that. So everybody here can do an anonymous action. And that's why the Spanish revolutionaries of today are able to do this, and the Spanish authorities can't cut off the head of the movement because there is no Che Guevara. There isn't someone standing there saying, hey, give this attention. And that's very valuable because it allows for resistance, right? Not just protest. And that's something which we are really very quickly losing in our society, which is extremely dangerous for democracy in itself.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah,
the generation gap is right here.
I think if you combine what you both just said, that's, yeah, the label, the perspective on the label is an answer to your question about are there ethics which crystallized, and there are ethics that crystallized, and that's yeah, that's why there can be this label. If not, anonymous wouldn't be a label, but just nothing. And this label stands for a specific rejection of traditional politics, of a way of how democracies are yeah, sorry for my English, organized traditionally. And I think if you, in this regard, Occupy and Anonymous are quite close, but Anonymous goes further and says there's a specific tool, and that's, yeah, anonymous communication online that can provide other forms of organizing politically. And that's what I think is quite interesting about it, that Anonymous is not only the idea, and on another level, yeah, people who identify with this idea, but it's also a principle of communication.
Sorry, just one small question. It was my impression that Anonymous growth was fueled by its openness. You mustn't be a hacker to participate in anonymous actions. So what we are seeing nowadays is that more and more news organizations are getting used to DDoS attacks. And nowadays, news organizations, media, they know, oh, the website is down for half an hour, so what? Do you think the media coverage of Anonymous has changed? And is it for the better or for the worse of Anonymous?
I think that, yeah, in the very beginning, or when the media, traditional media outlets got aware of Anonymous, in the beginning probably really only a few journalists might have understood what it's about, that it's not a group, that there were like, just the names that journalists gave Anonymous already showed that there wasn't a real understanding in the beginning. But I think, yeah, we see that Occupy, Anonymous, Pirate Party, and so on, all these movements that try to reject certain forms of political representation and the logic of representation, not only as organizing a democracy by voting for representatives, but also by rejecting like spokespersons and leadership in a specific way. I think that, yeah, journalists more and more understand what it's about and are also part of it. If you, for example, consider or think of Barrett Brown, one journalist.
Yeah, maybe he's not that quite a journalist.
He's not representative as, yeah, journalists, neither is Anonymous, but people who covered Anonymous and then got more and more involved, and then that's another very important and, yeah, question of how to promote the idea of Anonymous without spokespersons. And if journalists who like felt more and more attracted identified themselves with Anonymous, but afterwards continue to speak for Anonymous, that creates more and more problems.
This is actually something that we see also with the Pirate Party, that lots of journalists who cover the Pirate Party are becoming pirates themselves, because the idea that traditional means of doing politics and organization of social movements and political movements, that they are basically over and that we need to try out new stuff. This is one of the biggest achievements of Anonymous, that basically the idea that there doesn't need to be a leader, at least not publicly known leader, and that there are ways of organizing protest or activism that don't require hierarchical structures and that don't require memberships and that don't require recognizable faces, is of course the answer to the oppression and the surveillance that the governments of this world are basically rolling out. So the answer is, of course, like Anonymous discovered with Scientology, if your enemy is relying on surveillance and on punishing individuals, then the answer is not giving him this data. And the problem that we see here is that the learning curve in these movements, both Anonymous and Occupy, and also in the Pirate Party, by the way, is relatively bumpy. So you're having lots of problems that were basically anticipated. We can overcome many of them with technology that were not available, for instance, in the last wave of this kind of thinking, which was the basic democracy thinking that came up in the 60s and 70s when the last big social movements came up, and in Germany with the Greens. And so there are ways to use technology to solve these problems, but we are not yet there. So there is not a template that a new social movement can use and say, okay, this is how you do a social movement without leaders and without heads that can be chopped off. We are still in the experimenting phase, and Anonymous is one of these experiments.
First Jacob, then one last question, and then it's up to you.